Yeah, so thank you, John. And yeah, the coordinating committee is a volunteer position, and it requires a tremendous amount of effort. So I definitely want to thank them for that. And then, of course, our board of directors is another volunteer position, and they also engage quite heavily. And so thank you to them. So, as John said, thank you for everyone here for traveling and spending an entire day with us. And if you're able to go to the Sequoia Project meeting tomorrow and the Carry Quality meeting on Friday, that's a huge investment in your time. So, I hope we're doing our best to make it all time well spent. So I have to mention that at Thanksgiving last week, and of course Thanksgiving is a multi-day affair for many of us. You know, parties on Saturday and Friday and Thanksgiving, but I was really struck, and I thought about this audience several times because I was asked again and again to re-explain what the eHealth Exchange is and what I do for a living. And even my kids, who were teenagers, said, "Yeah, Dad, what do you do?" And I thought, oh my goodness, how many times are we going to have to go through this? And I'm not the most patient person in the world, but it makes sense. People think that patient data exchange happens automatically. And so they don't understand why there's any level of effort to make it happen. But of course, you and I know that it doesn't happen automatically. And if we want it to happen automatically at some point down the road, hopefully soon, it's going to require a lot of intentional effort so that we can ensure that patient data flows automatically where it needs to be. But the market, the industry isn't there yet. But at some point, and again, I think it'll be quite soon, you know, patient data, patient flow will be automatic, and it'll be built in, baked in to fundamental healthcare workflow. But we're not there just yet. So we have jobs for now. Page down. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time looking at the industry because I'm really talking to the industry experts, but I do have a few observations here. So the industry is absolutely beginning to mature, or you might say it's been maturing, but however you want to assess it, there are some key indicators for this. And, the ones that kind of, strike me are probably, I don't know, regulation, adoption, quality, and choice. So we're going to talk more about it later today. I'm thrilled that we have some great experts here who are going to be speaking to us about it in more detail. But as you all know, we have the Trusted Exchange Framework, the TEF. And then we've got information blocking proposed rules. And then we even have a proposed CMS rule that would, if it goes into effect, that would potentially require payers to join a trusted framework. And that's super exciting. Whether or not you like regulation or not, it tells you that we've got some change coming, and hopefully it's good change. The next thing I observe is really the data quality, and Dee Dee Davis is going to talk to us more about this afternoon. But 5-10 years ago, it wasn't practical to try to measure and improve data quality, at least in the world of interoperability, because there wasn't a tremendous amount of data flowing 5-10 years ago. And we were just happy to get data to flow. And we weren't as focused as whether or not, when that data was flowing into our systems, whether or not our systems would choke on that data. Maybe there would be a medication that wasn't coded properly with an RX norm code. Or maybe there was a lab result coming in that wasn't coded properly with a LOINC code. Or maybe there were whole missing fields. But today's different. We do have a tremendous amount of data flowing in all the networks out there. And so now it's not greedy to say we've got to raise the bar. And we cannot continue to have data that isn't truly interoperable, either because we're missing required fields or wrong structures or wrong terminology. I'll get into. I keep saying I'll get into it later, but I will. But this is either data quality is either the most boring or the most exciting topic that we can probably talk about. And then I should probably mention choice. So, not only do providers and other healthcare organizations have multiple networks that they can choose from, but we're now in an environment where we have network to network exchange. So think about care equality. So we're now in a world where you can be in one network, and you can exchange within your network, but via care equality and other structures like the TEFCA, you can reach out of your network and exchange with someone in a different network. And these are all things that are telling me that the market is maturing. And I will have time for questions. All right, so even though the industry is going through so much change, we are continuing to grow, and I think we're actually still growing for a variety of reasons. I think the first is that there really is an appetite for trusted exchange. There's still the need with healthcare organizations out there to really understand where their data is going and why it's being used, and who has it. And that's one reason people come to the eHealth exchange. And then, of course, we have great support from key anchors, people who really engage, like you, all of our federal agencies, everyone on the coordinating committee. And our growth is continuing. Now, it has slowed. You look at 2018 to 2019, the growth rate has slowed. And that's not unexpected. There are a variety of reasons for that, and I think one of the reasons is that healthcare organizations have said, "Hey, let's just wait until the TEF is final and the interoperability or the information blocking rules are final, and our vendor moves us to an upgrade, and let's just slow down a little bit until these things are magically final." And of course, nothing's ever final. It's always changing. So I'm hopeful that maybe not in 2020, but maybe in 2022 or 2021, we'll start to see even more growth. So we continue to operate in all 50 states. We have over 200 health systems. We have 62 state and regional HIEs. Of course, 4 federal agencies, so CMS, the VA, the Defense Health Agency, and the SSA, as well as many state and regional government organizations. And then we have some other great provider groups and provider collaboratives that really engage in improving patient care. So I mentioned that we have 62 state and regional HIEs, and this is kind of surprising me because there's definitely a trend or a micro trend in consolidation. So some of these state and regional HIEs are consolidating. But then there's some white spaces, so there are some new HIEs forming. And then in other spots where there are white spaces, some of the other state and regional HIEs are expanding into those areas and making connectivity happen locally. But we do have some new and long-standing HIEs continuing to join us. So in 2019, I think the eHealth Exchange really turned your worlds upside down, and I apologize for that. We just had a tremendous amount of activity, and because this is a community, we're required to get your input on a number of items. And since we had so much going on, there were probably a lifetime supply of emails headed out your way. And those will continue through January because we have amended the DRSA. So if you're not living and breathing eHealth Exchange 24/7, I'll kind of refresh this because I know you all have your own jobs and many of you branch out far beyond interoperability. So the eHealth exchange, so our participants have been trying to amend the DIRSA, that's our multi-party trust agreement, for about 2.5 years. And it's important. It was important because the industry has been moving and evolving and maturing, and our agreement needed to reflect that. So the our participants in the coordinating committee overwhelmingly voted to approve it. So as of Saturday, the DIRSA has been amended. And that means that it will go into effect on February 1st. And there are a number of things that that does, but kind of the big ones are that it enables our participants who haven't already had access to Carry Quality to onboard to Carry Quality. So again, not only can they exchange within the eHealth Exchange network, but they can branch out into, I think it's 21 live Carry Quality networks and exchange with them. So they can really further their reach. It also allows some value-based care organizations to better exchange over the eHealth Exchange. And then I might mention the hub. I'll get into some more detail about that in a few moments. But we've turned your worlds upside down with the hub. And so, with the hub, we're really making sure that our participants can exchange with all other eHealth Exchange participants who exchange for treatment. And then content quality. So all of our participants completed content validation this year, and that does not mean they passed. In fact, they have about another 16 months if they didn't pass to retest and pass. And again, this is really going to make it so that data is truly interoperable. And so if you pull data into your analytics system or you pull data into your EHR, you're going to be able to truly use it. And this is huge. I don't know of any other networks that are doing this, but it's great for a variety of reasons. And some of our participants who didn't pass, in fact, many of them, have already remediated those conformance issues and have since come to pass. So I want to make sure I leave time for questions. When I talk about the hub, for any of you that are new here, the eHealth Exchange started out using this federated network. And so that meant that, especially because it was small, it started with humble beginnings, 12 to, I think it was 19 early adopters or anchors. It made sense to say, hey, let's just create a direct or point-to-point connection with everyone else in the network. But now that we have almost 300 endpoints in the network, it's no longer practical. And it really limits our ability to scale and to exchange information. So we now have 159 participants who are live on the hub, and a number of others that are technically ready. We just need to get a BAA for them, a business associate agreement, so that we're comfortable taking their PHI, and we can flip the switch and make them live on the hub as a responder. So altogether, we have 82% of the network is either live on the hub or ready to go live one of these Wednesdays. That's when we go live. We have our hub go lives. As soon as we get that BAA, Business Associate Agreement, signed. And now there's still work to do on the hub, there's no question. One of the big things we need to do is to get more of our participants live as initiators. So all of these participants are able to respond to the hub. So if you're OCHIN, or you're the VA, or you're the Intercommunity HIE, or you're Advent Health, or whomever, you're able to initiate a request with your single connection to the eHealth Exchange hub and pull back patient information. So those 160 participants are live and responding. And we need to make sure they're also live and being able to initiate. So, now that we have a hub go live, granted with definitely with work to do, The next big question is, what do we want to do next? Of course, we know that we want to stay laser focused on completing the implementation of the hub, our new technology platform. But we also know that we need to stay laser focused on improving patient care. So there are a number of things that we need to consider, obviously. You've all been through this. But we need to focus on where the market's headed, and we need to focus on where there are gaps in the market that we might be able to fill. And then we need to think about whether or not, or we need to identify what our core competencies are and distinctive competencies and see where we can leverage that to move next. So, I would say that the key issues are probably the challenges that our participants have is probably the number one thing that we need to consider. And if this slide looks familiar, it's very, very close to the same slide that I showed last year if you were able to attend this session. So I don't believe that our participants' needs have changed a whole lot, at least in the world of what we might potentially be able to add value with. There's still the need to expand reach. People still say, hey, it's great that I can reach out to XYZ healthcare organizations, but there are still many more that I need to do. And that's where care equality is going to play a big help. And then we still need to make, providers and other healthcare organizations still need to make data exchange easier and cheaper. And that's definitely something that the hub and all of our centralization activities are intended to help with. Timeliness. It's not very often that you've got a clinician sitting back in his or her chair with nothing to do saying, you know what, I think I'll query for that patient, Jay Nakashima, who's coming in tomorrow, or who I'm managing his chronic disease state. And so to supplement this query and retrieve, we need more. We need a push. So we need the ability to do things like to provide an RLS, a record locator service, so that we have some hints as to where to search. And then above and beyond that, we need more push solutions so that we have the capability to automatically send or facilitate the sending of data where it needs to be so that query and retrieve isn't our only mechanism to pull information. And of course, we need that content quality we've discussed. So I believe this is my last slide, if I remember correctly, and we'll have lots of time for question and answers. But probably the most important thing I can stress here is to reiterate a signal we've already been giving consistently, and that is that we do plan to apply to become a qualified health information network under the Trusted Exchange framework. Now, of course, there are caveats there. If the final guidance comes out and it doesn't seem practical because there's what we perceive to be an infeasible requirement, then that's something we'll shy away from or ease into later. But based on the indications we have now, this is the wave of the future in the US, and we do plan to be one of those qualified health information networks. I mentioned that we need to complete the rollout of the hub. So again, we have 160 of our participants live. We need to beef that up and make it so that all of our participants are connected. The big thing there, again, is getting the BAAs, because most of them are technically ready for a go-live one of these Wednesdays. And we're also, for those of you in IT, unit testing broadcast. And broadcast queries are a draft requirement under the draft TEF, Trusted Exchange Framework. But when I talk about a broadcast query, I'm basically saying that's the scenario where instead of asking one eHealth Exchange participant, hey, do you have patient John Smith and any information, you ask all eHealth Exchange participants for that info. And of course, that's exactly what clinicians need. But it is overwhelming for the receivers. So imagine if your poor IT system and your poor data center and your poor IT folks were receiving exponentially more queries each day. You know, they don't want the lights to dim. And then, of course, someone's got to look at that data and hopefully do something with it. So there are workflow implications. But it is required by the TEF, and so we are going to be rolling that out very, very soon, so that we can have the VA and the Defense Health Agency pilot this for us. In effect, most of you have already been receiving these large number of queries from the VHA, not in the form of a broadcast, but we don't think the VA's volume is going to make most of your is going to result in more volume for you, but the DoD will be new. But with this, we can, number one, test out the ability, the utility of it, the efficacy, and we can start to measure the response of the participants. So if a fictitious St. Mary's Hospital in whatever state starts receiving this increased volume from the DoD and perhaps from the VA, we can measure that. And that will allow us to say, hey, do we move forward? Is it no big deal? Can we move forward and provide this to additional eHealth Exchange participants? Or do we instead want to say, hey, DoD and VHA, you guys continue with your broadcast queries, but for everyone else, let's rely on something that some consider to be more efficient, that being a record locator service. So we are still, as part of Care Equality, rolling out a record locator service, that one being the one offered by SureScripts. And we're also looking at the possibility of supplementing that with a homegrown record locator service. And we haven't yet determined whether or not that makes sense, whether or not it's practical, whether or not it's too much of a heavy lift, but we're at least taking a look at whether or not we want to have a second record locator service. The Care Equality Go Live. So now that the DRSA has been signed, we are planning for a Care Equality Go Live in February. So we've been actively testing with Care Equality implementers, as has our friends at the SSA, and thank you for that. So we're planning on a Care Equality Go Live in February. Now that is optional. So many of our participants already have access to Care Equality, and they might think, hey, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is some of the eHealth Exchange participants have not had that extended reach, and they will have the choice as to whether or not they want to connect with Care Equality. So we'll be sending a notification out about that in early January. Content quality. So, I mentioned that right now, each of our participants are providing a non-production version of their content, or they completed this. They submitted a non-production version of their content for evaluation. And some passed, some failed. I'm very excited, and this is still conceptual, but I'm very excited about moving aggressively in 2020 so that we can hopefully offer a real-time content quality option. And so, again, this is conceptual, but the idea, and some of us have spoken about this in the preceding months, but the idea is that maybe we would say, hey, we're going to scan or evaluate every 100th document from this fictitious St. Mary's Hospital once a month. And we're going to run it through our content validator and see if there are issues with their content. And then let them know, hey, you've got this issue with location of service, or you're missing a SNOMED code, or whatever else. I should mention fire. A lot of these things that we have on our roadmap are absolutely volunteer dependent. So we already have a fire directory, and that's live in production, but I would love to be able to exchange information amongst our participants in 2020 via fire. But I really need a couple, because you have to have at least two to tango. But I'd really love to have a couple of organizations come forward and say, hey, we're tired, or we appreciate exchanging these comprehensive clinical documents, CCDAs, but there are times when we need to exchange something more discrete. So medications for medication reconciliation, or I just want lab results, or I just want whatever. And maybe I want that via push fire, or maybe I want that via pull fire. But regardless, please let us, anyone at the eHealth Exchange, know if you're thinking out loud about exchanging via fire in 2020, because we would love to facilitate making that happen. We're going to have a great speaker later today, John Lunsk, who's going to be talking about electronic case reporting. That's a new use case to the eHealth Exchange in 2019 that we're going to continue to roll out. And I should probably mention a couple of these other stretch goals. And the one that that's kind of nearest and dearest to my heart is PDMP. So we are moving forward with setting up the technical ability to exchange with state repositories that maintain controlled substances. But this is another place where we need a volunteer, and in this case, it's a volunteer from a state PDMP authority. We really need one of them to pull the trigger, and we're talking to several, but we really need one of them to pull the trigger and say, yes, we want to share our controlled substances database as appropriate with participants in the eHealth Exchange so that we can marry the state PDMP medication list with the richer data that the health systems and HIEs have in their systems. So, I'm talking about the medication list you would have in an EHR, and the toxicology results, and whatever else. Images is another place where if we get at least 2 volunteers, I'd love to move forward with image exchange over the eHealth Exchange in 2020, but that's dependent upon volunteer status. And finally, I think the only one I haven't, the one I'll mention next is the Pulse integration. So Audacious Inquiry AI has done a great job of coming out with a new iteration of the Pulse system. And the Pulse system, for those of you who don't remember, is the disaster response system. So if you've got a volunteer clinician showing up at a disaster, so think about maybe, hey, there's been a hurricane or an earthquake or a wildfire. This is the system that volunteer clinicians can log into, get credentialed, and pull back information, when they're working in an alternative care setting. So if there's been a hurricane and they've been displaced 300 miles and they show up and they're at a makeshift clinic in a church basement or in a school gym or even in a tent, God forbid, they've got this tablet or laptop they can use to query the eHealth Exchange participants and pull this information back and perform safer, more effective care. So anyway, we need to integrate with that new version, and I would expect we would do that early in the year, but we'll see. So, and then I mentioned MPI. That would be something we would only do because it's a tremendous amount of effort and coordination. But that's something we would do potentially if we decided that we wanted to build a homegrown record locator, and if our design called for that. Now, someone is supposed to be nagging me about time and how I'm going over. But why don't we have some microphones here, and I'm hoping that some of you folks can come up and ask really tough questions and give us lots of compliments. So who's first?
Hi, Jay. Hi, Mark Wine from the VA Central Office. We've discussed, I'm particularly interested in the Pulse system. Could you go into a little bit of a description of the current challenges that you've overcome in implementing Pulse for emergencies and disasters with a couple new states that you've been targeting, as well as what challenges do you want to overcome, do we need to overcome together to have Pulse as considerable nationwide solution for EMS data with integration with EMRs.
Yeah, great
nationwide.
question, Mark. And it's great to meet you in person for the first time. We've been on the phone several times. Um, so, um, so, it's truly heartbreaking every time we have another wildfire or another hurricane, and we're surprised that we're not ready. And I can't even imagine what's going to happen when we have a big earthquake or something of that magnitude. But Pulse has been alive and well in California, and it has been rolled out for wildfires there a number of times. And that's because they've been very aggressive and had very intentional, concerted efforts to prepare. So, throwing a tablet and a laptop and the eHealth Exchange solution to them is almost a slam dunk. The challenge is making this a priority and coordinating all of the state and local authorities who are already overwhelmed, so that they can have the drills and figure out, hey, how do we know when a disaster hits, where to go and who to give the tablet to, and ensure that it's set up to the state credentialing system and all that good stuff. So the good news is that a number of states have received federal funding to help them move forward with this, and I think, of course, they have to wait for their state legislature to approve 10% matching funding, which adds to the timeline. But as I remember it, Florida is the next likely state to go live on Pulse. And of course, my crystal ball is broken, but I'll speak very ignorantly and guess that this is something that's going to take them extreme minimum, 9 months to get ready. If there's any way for us, I know the Sequoia project is working aggressively to prepare templated materials, like a starter kit for each state, saying here's what you need to do. But unfortunately, the burden is largely on the states.
Thanks. Thank you.
You bet. What other questions? Oh, great. See one at the microphone.
Morning. Prashant Tharakan, Northrop Grumman. I saw that in one of your slides there was a patient-centric objective represented. I was curious to know if there was anything in your roadmap that spoke to perhaps patient access to the data. You talked about physicians credentialing from disaster sites. Yeah,
that's embarrassing. So I probably didn't say patient once, and of course they're really at the heart of this. So we did amend the DRSA to make it even more clear that individuals, consumers, patients can leverage the network. I have reached out to a number of the app vendors because I would love to have them, as appropriate, if they're able to authenticate these individuals. I would love to have them have access, more direct access to our network, and to be able to pull their information. I'm not of the school of thought that thinks that people aren't smart enough, consumers aren't smart enough to see detailed information. I think most of them are, and they're able to work with their clinicians to improve their health, but they've got to see what's there in the first place. So anyway, there's nothing set in stone, but yes, I would love to get some of those app vendors connectivity, unless someone knows why it doesn't make good sense. Question.
Hi, this is Tiffany from Denver Health. I had a quick question about the TEFCA agreement and about whether or not the eHealth Exchange is affiliated enough with the Sequoia project to make it problematic by you guys becoming a QHIN. I know in the DRSA or in the TEFCA agreement it states that you can't be affiliated with the RAE, so I didn't know how that was going to work with you guys.
Yeah, that's a great question. So last year, the Sequoia project, the eHealth Exchange, and Care Equality went out of its way to break out into 3 separate corporations with our own governance structure and our own BRE-owned legal entities. So we are quite separate. And there are absolutely times, in fact, multiple times in every day, when I suspect that we've gone a little too far. And we'll find a happy medium there somewhere. But I think it's fair to say that most of you know more about care equality and the Sequoia Project than I do, because I'm often afraid to ask because it's inappropriate. So I go out to the website, and if it's not there, I'm uninformed. Steve?
Hi, Jay. This is Steve Gravely. I'd be happy to
Yeah,
clarify
please.
that a bit more. Hi, guys. I'm Steve Gravely. I'm legal counsel for Sequoia and eHealth Exchange and Care Equality. It's an excellent question, and thank you for asking it. The eHealth Exchange is actually governed by the coordinating committee. The eHealth Exchange exists by virtue of the DRSA. And as most of you probably know, it began over a decade ago as a contract activity of the Office of the National Coordinator. And so when we talk about the eHealth Exchange as a network, and that's what would qualify as a QHIN, that is different from the corporate entity that Jay referred to. And so I know this is complicated, and I don't want everybody's eyes to glaze over, but when we did our corporate restructuring last year, we did take great pains to follow ONC's guidance that they issued through FAQs on exactly what the affiliation language meant in the RCE Notice of Funding Opportunity announcement. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with those FAQs, they're on the ONC website, and they may be applicable to your organization. If you are familiar with them, you understand that ONC talks about affiliation in the context of one entity being able to control another entity or have substantial influence over. And so Sequoia has a board which is completely and totally separate from the coordinating committee. The coordinating committee is the only body that has any legal authority over the eHealth Exchange. And that authority is given to the coordinating committee in Section 4 of the DRSA. And it's totally derivative. It's given by the participants. I'm happy to talk with you or anyone else about that further, but I just wanted to provide a little bit of context.
Thank you, Steve.